Back on Rainier, and we have a very, very special guest today. One of my one of my good friends, and geez, the genesis of Rainier Avenue Radio, and Tony B. It is a pleasure to have you on the show today, my brother. How are you?
Oh man, fantastic, Juan. It is great to be able to be a guest on Juan on Rainier.
It's a nice read, doesn't it? Juan on Rainier. And the
Yeah.
Latino brothers and the Afro-Hispanic brothers are all fired up about that.
It was great to be here, Juan, man. And
Thank
you
you
know,
so much.
I do have to say thank you so much for all the work that you do in the community and having you part of Rainier Avenue Radio and supportive of Rainier Avenue Radio for a number of years, man. Just really appreciate what you do.
Tony B, I recently I was in Safeway, and a lady came up to me and she says, "Geez, aren't you on Rainier Avenue Radio?" And my wife and my kids, we were at Costco one time, and
Mhm.
a person came up and said, "Aren't you the guy that called the football game on Rainier Avenue Radio?" And at Seattle Prep, of all places, Seattle Preparatory Academy, one of my good friends, a parent, she said that you're like a real broadcaster. I mean, look how she said, "You're like a real broadcaster." Are, do you sit down and think about the impact that you've had? And that's just not from me, that's from so many others
Mhm.
that you've given the opportunity to share their stories and to develop their talents on Rainier Avenue Radio.
I don't. Um, Occasionally, the thing is doing it. And that's really where my focus is. It's on doing it and having done 20 years in major market radio, um, and realizing the obstacles that were put in place, in particular for people who are of color, who are from underserved communities, and sharing their thoughts. Um, the goal was just to make sure to get those voices out there so that those voices can be heard. And beyond amplifying those voices where people are heard, it's not just that. It it's good for everyone to hear what people are thinking, how they're feeling, how they are interpreting information, especially from a dominant community that doesn't hear these voices and doesn't understand the challenges and unanticipated things that affect and impact our community. So that's just a long way of saying, yes, it's cool to get word out from people who aren't normally heard. But it's not just that, it's good for everyone.
Tell me, okay, so we had you had the low power FM station. You had that, and there's a situation that occurred with that,
Mhm.
and then quickly you transitioned. And I remember you were telling me, I believe we were at a Franklin High School basketball game. You said, "Hey, Juan, do you call baseball?" And I said, "Yeah, I call. I'd like to." And I want to come back to that in a second. I'm going to
Mhm.
package it up and put that in the background for a second. I said, "I'd like to." He said, "Well, I I've got Rainier Avenue Radio," and he told me about it. And I had a chance to talk with Rick Dupree, and
Mhm.
Rick was saying that he was helping you out.
Yeah.
How did you transition from the low power station and develop Rainier Avenue Radio? What was the genesis of that? I use the word genesis, but where did you get the start on that?
That's a long story, and I try not to uh, go back on
Okay.
that period of time, but that was a period of time where the federal government released FM signals to urban markets for radio because the major radio stations were no longer doing that FCC mandate to broadcast in the interest of communities. And so I partnered with an entity and we got a license. And that was my goal to make sure that this 100-watt station, um, and it says it in the application, was meant for the community, for community voices to be heard. The organization that I partnered with, I was on the board, that meant I would have been an owner of the radio station, which is also what I wanted as part of this board. I recused myself from the board because they said, well, Tony, build the radio station. So I was the guy who knew how to do that. Thought it would be a good idea for us to get the final the final approval for our radio station by operating an internet radio station. And so I started an internet radio station. And shortly after doing that, the entity started saying, this is what we want to hear on air. I was saying, well, no, this is a community radio station that has to be developed, and that will be. So to make a long story short, they changed the locks and locked me out of the radio station and told me they wanted to renegotiate the deal. And so for me, it was all about communicating. And there's a lot of things that are radio. AM is a wave. FM is a wave. You know what? The internet is a wave. Mm-hmm. And so even though at the time it wasn't the most popular way to communicate, I decided rather than to put myself in a position where I would be dealing with an entity where I've already had these problems, and we went through getting this FM signal, the main thing was to continue to give folks in our community an opportunity to have their voice heard. And so within a month, I started Rainier Avenue Radio on the internet.
The ability to have your voice heard and the ability to broadcast, and it seems like with this, and you touched on it eloquently as you always do. The internet is a wave, and it certainly has become a wave, and you have allowed so many people to access that. And I remember when you asked me, have you ever called a baseball, or do you call baseball games? And I had always wanted to, but I never had an avenue. And I remember when we were doing a baseball game out in Bellevue, and I believe there's a gentleman from the I think it was from Southwestern Washington, and he was with that radio station. He said, "Well, I'm a hired gun. I've been doing this, blah 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 blah." And I thought to myself, how fortunate are we that Tony has allowed us to do this, and given us a platform for us to share our talents and skills, and to do shows and to be able to do this. And I hearken back to what you said before. Radio. And you've told me this, radio, this business, but you also know how to allow people and give them the opportunity to share their lives and share their stories. Tell us about the importance of that and the impact that certainly has had.
Wow. Well, this.
Because just not to interrupt you, Tony, there was nowhere else for us to share those stories. we were yelling out in the streets. Hey, I got something I want to tell you.
Yeah. Wow. When I tell people we have over 80 members of our community who host their own shows, and I can see it doesn't really impact. So I say it again. That means you have over 80 members of the community who would not be having their voices heard, who would not be picking up the skill set of communicating to a mass audience, who would not be sharing whatever they think is important to the world. Just that alone. Now, we have more than 80, probably upwards of the number of folks who've hosted shows is probably close to more of 150 on this radio station. And you think about that, people who have said, I don't know how to do this, but I will take the opportunity to learn how to do it. And they've done it. And it is just amazing for me. And people ask me still today, and we still get requests, I'd like to have my own radio show. How do I do it? I say, it's very simple. You fill out the show application on Rainier Avenue Radio. It will help guide you into what you would like to do by asking you how long your show would be, what you want your show to be about, just to help the thought process of organizing it. Then we provide you with a producer, an engineer, and we will remove every obstacle in the way of you getting on the air. All you have to do is want to do it.
Where did your passion for serving the community start?
Yeah, I don't know that I have a passion for it. Juan, it's just I'm just doing what I think that I'm supposed to do. It's not like I want to serve the community, you know. I want to. I don't. That's hard because that's not it. It's just these are. I was given the opportunity to be on the air at a the number one station in Seattle at the time. I had really no radio experience. I want other people to have that opportunity. That's all. I mean, I had that opportunity. So I'm not that community dude. You know what I mean?
You say you're not, but when I was at Fairfax Cancer Research Center, for example, and I had the gentleman from Baltimore coming out for prostate cancer, I said, Tony B, I have this unique situation. We're looking to get him some airtime here in Seattle, and we've got him doing these programs. I call you up, boom. Who's on Community Street Beat? This gentleman. I have Candace Wiggins. I'm a friend, and they were like, my bosses were like, hey, do you think that man from the radio station can interview Candace? Because we had her up here for 2 days, and we were paying for hotel and other things for this. And let me call Tony, who has Candace Wiggins on the radio. It's Tony B. And I always mention you with Lori Matsukawa and Deborah Horn and the DK Cerna and the journalists in our community who are people of color. You all have done such a great job. You have been so true to serving that. So it's interesting to say that I don't. You feel like you don't, when to me you've been like an anchor in the community.
I do know, and I am aware that there are people who are I don't know, it's hard. I mean, there are people who are very happy that I do what I do. So I'm aware of that. It's pretty cool for people to go, you're the community guy. You're the guy who discusses and talks about issues and interviews people. So that is very it makes me feel good. But it is really more like in doing the mayor's candidate debate that that was the last minute, but it was okay. Wait a minute, the primary is on August 15th. Ballots go out on the 18th. They've talked to candidates, have been in a number of different forums, from transit to education, but they have not been in a forum that hyper focuses on questions that may be asked by our South Seattle community, and for me particularly, by someone who's Black. I'm Black. I need to do something about that. And the good fortune to have a radio station, to have a theater, I just feel like, okay, utilize the resources that you have available to you. Otherwise, I mean, the universe works in a weird way, man. I feel very thankful that there's access to all this stuff, but you have to use it, and so, okay, you know what? This thing is going to be on the 16th. None of the candidates know. July 3rd, heading into July 4th weekend, every candidate got an email at 8:00 at night when they're not going to be checking, and then they won't be checking until Monday, that I'm asking you to be part of a candidate forum on the 16th. And you probably don't have a lot of time to think about it, but you know what? We need to hear your voice. And if you have not at this point communicated and shared your platform with people in the community who you consider to be your constituents, this is your opportunity. And lo and behold, all 7 candidates responded positively. And then we had a packed house for this forum, and I'd suggest anyone go watch it and look at it. You're going to find information. And then it was done in a way where we had 2 panelists, and then I was the host, and then we also took community questions. And it was interesting. It was very good. And it was a lot of things, and for some of the candidates, it might have been uncomfortable, but it was necessary because we're talking about the person who's going to be the next mayor of Seattle, which affects and impacts everything. And this community deserves the right to hear from these candidates, all of them, not just the top one or the top two, because they're running for mayor. That in itself is something to be applauded. Whether I agree with what you're saying or you don't agree, you've decided that you want to be part of a solution to whatever you see as a problem, and you're going to run for mayor. Well, here's a platform to share that. But we're also going to ask you questions about what your interests are, what you value, and this is what we value and how you respond to that. So it just,
It's so interesting when you look at the history of the Black community in Seattle, which you quite do, and we certainly see that in February with our Black History Month call to conscience. But when you look at the history of media in our town and the recent history, sometimes that history has been contentious. We had two newspaper owners who were titans in their day, and they didn't like each other, and there was some tension between the two of them as they were trying to get circulars out and develop a business around quote unquote the Black media in the community. And
so
sometimes
you're not saying the names, but I hear you.
you
But
know you know
what I do, I think that's part of what, because I say the names. You know what I mean? But I
I
think
know
I
I
know
know
who
you
you're
do.
talking about.
Mr. Beaver
Hmm.
and Mr. Bennett.
It's just part of our history.
It
That's all
is.
it is. If it was contentious, it was contentious.
It was very contentious, and I remember those days. And I remember when Mr. Beaver died in 1992, as friends that they were, or however you describe that relationship.
They
Um,
started out working together.
exactly, and one of Mr. Bennett did not show up at Mr. Beaver's funeral. I mean, it got that bad. And my thing is with you have been the opposite of that, in my opinion. I mean, you have reached out to media partners here. You have reached out to the other media group who has a real nice thing going right now, and we've been working with them at times. And I was just wondering, did that tension from those relationships and that history give you the thought that for us to serve the community better, we have to work together and we shouldn't be stepping on each other?
I've always thought that. As you know, I did 20 years in major market radio. And I was surprised that our local Black media was not supportive of me. And they looked at me as though I was working with the enemy. And it wasn't easy where I was already. And to have the Black media also question what I was doing as opposed to being supportive of what I was trying to do. Yeah, that, I didn't know that I was eventually going to have my own media company. You know what I mean? But
It changes things a little bit.
but even in that process, I was thinking anyone who works for a media company, and I'm going to say Black because I'm Black, and again, I'm supportive of everybody, but anyone who's Black who works for a media company should be supportive of each other. It's no different than, being an economist, or in the or being an athlete. You should be supportive of each other.
Yeah, Asunta Ing, who I love, Asunta Ing with the Northwest Asian Weekly.
Mhm.
When I ran for the state legislature in 1998, she said, "Juan, I love you. You know I love you. I'm going to say positive things about you. You have been a great friend to me, but I support Asian people. I have to support Sharon."
Mhm.
I respected that.
Mhm.
I respected that, and and Asunta Ing has always been very, very good to me. But the fact is she supports the Asian American community,
Mhm.
and no matter how we look at defining that.
Mhm.
And I didn't have a problem with that,
Mhm.
and she was very, very good to me, and she always has been. and I see a lot of that in Tony B as well. You have spoken about issues in our community from a perspective that has been focused on our Black community,
Mhm.
and I think you have represented that voice, and you certainly have not been compromising. You've been uncompromising, and does the responsibility come with that from the media perspective? Do you believe that there's a responsibility that you have to make sure that these these points are being made?
And I'll say this when sometimes and I don't do a lot of interviews because I don't like to, but even with the Seattle Times, and they call me Black media. I'm not Black media. I'm media. I'm Black. And that doesn't make me Black media. That means I'm Black. Now, what that does is it makes me aware of shared identity. It makes me aware of challenges that folks may have that normal media doesn't, pay attention to. And this particularly came out in COVID, at a time when it was an emergency, and our major entities, organizations understood. You know what? We're not actually connected to the Black community. Now, were they connected to the Asian community? Were they connected to the African immigrant community? Those are all, legitimate questions as well, because we were in an emergency. My thing was, I'm Black. This is how I was born. You know what I mean? And so this is my perspective. And so what are you doing as an organization or an entity or a media company to ensure that Black people are getting services? Because we're generally the last to receive services, and we're very skeptical about government. And so I just wanted, it's not that I was exclusive of anything. It's just that I wanted to ensure that Black people were going to get the attention that they needed, because sure 3-4 months after, the February that this happened, what comes out in the news? Well, Black people aren't getting, you know what I mean? Well, Black people are having a hard time. Well, Black people are getting, but that's why. And it's not because I'm saying that Black is this or that or the other. It just requires representation. And having said that, it also makes me more sensitive to issues that impact and affect all people in this country, who are considered to be immigrants to this country, which everyone is except for the Native Americans, but even Native American community, and they have problems and troubles of their own. But when it came to COVID, they had access because they had the Native nations. You have people who immigrate to this country who have strong ties to the country that they originally come from. Black people from this country who are descendants of slaves, we came from descendants of slaves, so we don't have the infrastructure that is necessary, which is why I think it's important that we support each other. I'm not advocating taking over anything or supplanting anything, or I'm just saying that it's up to us to make sure that we have an infrastructure that's in place so that we can work with other cultures, with other entities in an efficient and effective way. Because if it's hard to work with Black people, you're not going to work with them. You're going to say, I'm going to work with Asian people. Nothing against, you know what I'm saying? It becomes our responsibility to make ourselves so valuable that you say, I have to work with that aligned community because they will forward the progress for all of us. And we have done that in the past in a number of different ways. And I won't go into how we have created a platform for all of these other folks to come to this country and be treated well. But we have. Those were the rights that we fought for that are now available to everyone, except us.
Tony B is with me today on Juan on Rainier, our weekly podcast where we sit down and talk about things and chop it up with interesting people here in Southeast Seattle. And certainly Tony B is more than an interesting person here in Southeast Seattle. He has created an avenue for so many to speak and have their voices heard through Rainier Avenue Radio. Tony, people tend to forget in your 20 years working in mainstream media, You are an outstanding, and I say this not just because you're sitting here. I believe it. And I've learned from you. You are an outstanding media journalist. I just remember, I bring you people to interview from Fred Hutch, and Tony. I was like, man, I wonder if Tony did any research on this. You can sit and talk to someone for an hour and ask interesting questions, tie their work into communities that they're in. The gentleman that I brought in from prostate cancer, he was in Baltimore. Candace Wiggins was the star at Stanford University, played in the WNBA. It's like you have a chip in your head where you bring all of this information out of the interview. And I was just wondering, how did you develop your interview skills?
Again, Juan, I think it just comes from being curious and allowing people to share, talk, and being inquisitive about things that they say, and relating that to community. I'll tell you, I got started in radio. I was in Minnesota, and a guy named I don't remember his name right now, but he asked me. I was telling him that K-Fox was going out of business. If you remember K-Fox, and they were, it was bad in the music industry because of this. And he said, "Well, why don't you buy it?" And I said, "I can't buy a radio station." And he told me about this thing called the FCC, Broadcasting in the Interest of the Community. So I went to K-Fox and I asked them if I could intern. At the time, I was a musician, and they told me no, because they said, "You just want to play your company's songs on the radio." I said, "No, I don't. I want to find out about this radio business." So they told me no. And so I wrote a business plan, and I went to Bingham Communications, who owned the station at that time. And I explained to them how I would pay them to lease the station, and they would stop losing money because of the fines that they were getting, because the station was run very shabbily at the time, because everybody knew it was being sold. And so they knew their job was going to end, and they were looking for other things. And they said, yes. They said, if you go to Day Media Broadcasting, who's going to buy the station, and they say yes, we'll make it happen. It's one of those things where you better be prepared for people to say yes. You prepare for people to say no. And I went to Day Media Broadcasting, and they said yes. And so there I was for 6 months, owning and operating K-Fox.
Wow.
And
I did not know that story.
I hired a bunch of college students to work and sell advertising, and who wants to be on the air?
I want to delve more into that with you, but we've got to take a break so we can do this, so we can get
well, that's
more.
How it happens.
That's how it happens on Juan on Rainier, on your community radio station, Rainier Avenue Radio.world. We'll be back in about 3 minutes.
Rainier Avenue Radio. Rainier Avenue Radio.
A new law is helping people save more money on prescription drug costs. You may also be able to save with Medicare's Extra Help program. Your premium cost can be zero and your out-of-pocket expenses are low. Who should apply? Single individuals earning less than $23,000 a year, or married couples earning less than $31,000 a year. Even if you don't think you qualify, you should still check out this program. Visit ssa.gov/extra help. Medicare costs are covered by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
Hey y'all, it's Traffic Jam with Kareem.
Thursday at 4 p.m.
Hey, Traffic Jam. Rainier Avenue Radio. Download the app so you don't miss out what's poppin' on Crackle Shining. It's your boy, Dream the Dream, on another beautiful week on here on Traffic Jam in Seattle. I hope you guys doing what you're supposed to do, being you're supposed to be. I got a good show for y'all. A lot to talk about. Kareem the Dream, keep up with everything.
Get your entertainment news with Kareem on the Traffic Jam, Thursday at 4 p.m.
Do you want to reach out to the Vietnamese community in Seattle? Just advertise in Le Viet Tây Bắc, that is Northwest Vietnamese News, the longest running Vietnamese language newspaper in our region. Go to nvnorthwest.com.
What's up, everyone? It's your girl, Queen Bree, inviting you to come join me on Clean Greens Living. Broadcasted Tuesdays, 12:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, live right here on Rainier Avenue Radio. On Clean Greens Living, we talk farming, community, and ways to being healthy. So come join me and let's discuss ways to create a healthier you and a healthier community.
Sediment cleanup of the lower Duwamish River has begun. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the members of the Lower Duwamish Waterway Group, which includes King County, the City of Seattle, and Boeing, have begun sediment cleanup of the Lower Duwamish Waterfall Superfund site. This important environmental project will address sediment pollution and help restore the health of the Duwamish River. Starting in the waterway's upper reach, construction activities extend from the south 102nd Street Bridge down straight to the Duwamish Waterway Park. Over the next 3 years, in-water activities will occur from October to February, ending in February 2027. Visit ldwg.org to learn about the upper reach cleanup and sign up for email updates.
Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready for this? This is Rainier Avenue Radio .world, the station that cares about our community.
Yeah. Welcome back to Juan on Rainier on your community radio station. I like how that bumper brings us in, the station that actually cares about the community on your community radio station, Rainier Avenue Radio.world. And we do care about the community, and we are activists and entertainers and people who, for the most part, we live down here in southeast and central Seattle, on the shores of Lesha, where I live, and so great to have. I still am in the South End. Remember the late Kevin Chandler, the football coach at O'Day, when I was going to the Highline High School job, and he said, Juan is always a South End guy. I go, I still live south of Yesler. I'm still technically, but I've moved a little further north, but we certainly are down here in the city still, and for all that intent and purposes, Tony B is our guest today, Rainier Avenue Radio. The managing general partner, kind of like Al Davis. I call you the managing general partner of Rainier Avenue Radio. And you were just kind of going on a fascinating history of the perception of black radio. I guess it's radio that had a black audience. Mm-hmm. We can discuss whether it was serving the community. What has made it so difficult for radio, or Tony, has it been difficult for black radio to work in Seattle?
White people wouldn't get out of the way, so that made it difficult to enter, whether it was a conscious or unconscious thing. And then there was the numbers game. There weren't enough black people. You know what I mean? To match up in the numbers game. So you wanted a particular sound because you wanted to gain as much audience as possible. That's the Seattle thinking, and I'll share a quick story with you. I took over K-Fox. I put myself on the air. Never been on the air before. I said, oh man, I'm going to play the best music. Love the music I play. Get audience. And so we didn't have the money to do, when people drive home, and tell them what the traffic was doing. So I would ask people, I'd just say, hey, give me a call if you're in traffic and tell me what the traffic's doing. And so people would call up, hey, Tony. That was the introduction of Tony B. Hey, Tony B, man, I'm here on I-5, man, and traffic is backed up. And I said, well, man, what are you doing? Well, man, I'm eating a ham sandwich. Man, keep your eyes on our traffic's not. I said, what are you doing on I-5 right now? Give me a call or whether you. And I started talking to people, and people were talking to me. And ironically, people liked talking to me more than they liked hearing popular music. I'm not saying I was doing anything great. I'm just saying that that became what people would talk about. They would, oh man, I heard you on the air, man, talking about traffic, and I heard you on the air talking about, and I was thinking the music. So when that experience ended and I had to give up the contract and Day Media Broadcasting took over, I got offers literally from all over the country to be on the radio. Time Cube 93 was playing black music for the first time, an all-white staff, and they wanted me to be on air. And so what we ended up deciding, because my choice was that I would do a talk show on a station that was playing hip-hop all day long on Sunday mornings at 8 o'clock. And I said, this is what I prefer to do. I know you're playing all this music, but I think this is where I should be. And so I started a talk show on Sunday mornings called Street Beat. And the first couple weeks I was on the air, people would call up and say, play some music. And I said, well, I'm not going to be playing music, so you can either wait till 9 o'clock or we can talk. You know, you don't want to hear what's going on in our community? Well, man, I do. And I just talk to them. So needless to say, that 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock hour that I was on the air on Cube 93 ended up in me advancing through this company and the ranks to being, by the time I was done, having 28 radio stations in the state of Washington that I was director of community affairs for, and 7 in the state of Oregon. So,
and that was through that was with Clear Channel Broadcast.
Eventually became Ackerley. Then it became Clear Channel. Clear Channel became iHeartMedia. And so as the company grew, I grew and advanced as well.
What makes the business of radio something you would be attracted to go into? And how does the business of radio work? I mean, it seems like, hey, it's like you said, I play some music, I get some sponsors, but Tony, I don't think it's that simple. And you certainly have made it look easier and have been more successful than a lot of people have. Tell us, how does the business of radio work, and how do you utilize that to build this station here?
Well, like everything, it changes. There was a time when most of the stations were singularly owned mom and pop agencies, entities that were managed by local companies, people. The 1995-1996 Telecommunications Act changed everything, because now as a major corporation, you could own multiple stations and media in the market. And so eventually these small stations that were owned by people, companies, but that were close to the, community became owned by big business, and they became conglomerates. And pretty soon you had basically 4 companies that controlled the entire media market. When I worked for Clear Channel, we owned 1,200 radio stations, just this one entity. So that changed things, and it went from being something where there was an interest in making sure that you were close to their community, when now what's important are the shareholders. How much money are you making? That's what's important. And that changed the game. So you had to adjust and adapt to that game. It also became more difficult for, I'm just going to say from my perspective, for people of color who did not sound like the dominant culture to become on the radio, because they were trying to reach the dominant culture, because that's where the money was, where the most money was.
Is that something in radio? I've always wondered that. Is that something in radio? You sound authentically black. I mean, I listen to the radio. I mean, that's one of the, Tony, before you and I even met and I started listening to Street Beat, I told you, I used to go on my runs around the neighborhood in Leschi, and I have your radio station on, and I said, I know this brother. This brother is really speaking and bringing things in. I'd listened to it as I was running. My good friend Scotty Dwight was talking to you and said, this is Tony B. And I was like, that's the dude on the radio. When we first met back in the early 2000s. I went to Catholic school. I learned in a very structured environment. My tone is very Northwest. If you hear me on the phone, and if you heard my mother says, when you hear my mother on the phone, you think you're talking to people who obviously have command of the English language, and our tone we've modulated. I mean, we modulated to make sure that we didn't threaten anybody in Catholic school. and I've always wondered about this in regards to sports broadcasters and broadcasters you see on the news. It seems like the modulated voice that sounds very aesthetic to the ear to a white market seems to be the people that we see on television.
Mhm.
Seems to be the people that we see we see and hear on the radio.
Mm-hmm.
You, on the other hand, have certainly, I mean, like I said, you knew this was an authentic black voice on the radio. Tell us about how you were able to work with management, or was it ever an issue, or did management, kind of say, "Geez, we got to see how this is going to work first."
Well, they gave me an hour on Sunday mornings at 8 o'clock instead of 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock drive time. To talk about issues that impact and affect the community that you're playing music 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and appealing to, but don't care about because they're not the dominant audience. But for us as black people, you're now playing our music. So we need access. But that's just part of the, that's 6% of the other 94% of the people that we need to keep. And so I think, and I don't know for sure, that they just said, be yourself. Now, that's all I was going to be. I will say that, in a few months, that listenership that maybe at 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning, if you listened at 7:45, there may be 10,000 people listening. And then at 8 o'clock, I had 90,000 people listening. And then when I was done at 9 o'clock, went back down. So I think that had something to do with them. And then, I will say, when 9/11 happened, I'm sitting at home. I'm watching it on television. And I get a call from the general manager of 7 radio stations that were part of, it was either Ackley or Clear Channel at the time. I don't remember whenever that happened. 2001? Is that
2001?
Tony, we need you to come in. Okay. I come in, I sit in the general manager's office. He says, Tony, we need you to go on the radio. And we need you to talk to our audiences about 9/11, what's taking place and what's happening. And I don't think that they did that because I was black. I don't think they did that because I authentically had a black voice. I think that they did it because I was communicating and sharing information with an audience that was struggling with the fact that why did this happen? And is this Islam versus, and so I think that it was my ability to communicate and share information and not judge and be sensitive to everything that allowed that. Now, in that process, I think people knew that a black man was talking.
There's something about the relationship and the way it can be developed through radio. Obviously, we had CNN and we had all of the media at the time, but it just seemed like just the shots were so overwhelming. And I remember turning it off and sitting and just listening to the radio. And I certainly remember when you were on and other radio voices were on. I felt bad for Mitch Levy and I think it was Steve Sandmeyer of KJR who were calling. They were doing their morning talk show that day, and as bits and pieces were coming in, not knowing the severity of it and not understanding that something, maybe the Mariners versus the San Diego Padres is not a big deal right now. And talking about the Seahawks isn't a big deal right now. They didn't know it at the time, but it really spoke to the connection that radio has, and your voice during those conversations really connects with a lot of people.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the fact that they had the confidence in me that whenever there was something that happened in the community that needed to be discussed, they'd ask me to come on the radio in prime time and have that discussion as opposed to one of the DJs that was on during prime time. And that's what I would do. I'd come on and, and other than that, I just did my little I ended up doing 30-minute shows on a country station, 30-minute show on a sports station. You might remember Get in the Game, which is the show on the sports
Get in
station.
the game.
And I would, whatever radio station I was on, I would try to relate to that particular audience's community and share things that were relevant and important to that community. And not trying to be a particular race or color or ethnicity. I'm who I am, and I'm Black. So that's all that was,
Like a lot of other media outlets, sports is very important. I remember you and I had this conversation when we first talked, and you wanted to tell the stories of kids because kids playing sports, basketball, football, baseball. This gives the parent wants to hear about that, and I didn't realize the power of that. Parents want to hear about their kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember a friend of mine who worked at Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center. Her son was working at Franklin High School, and she would text me, "Keep going because this is great. I'm so glad because I want to be late to the game."
Mm-hmm.
And the sporting aspect, the people at Seattle Prep during the pandemic, they weren't allowing the parents to go to the games. They had the opportunity to watch and to listen to their game on the radio. And you've done such a unique job of connecting the different schools in the area. You've been great about making sure that everyone from Cleveland High School, who might not have the biggest football turnout, to the O'Day High School and Eastside Catholic have the big turnouts. And then obviously the relationship with the WIAA, although they had to go to the NFHS network, which has impacted some of the ways that we can broadcast the games. But it really spoke to the fact that how important it was. And I still have texts from people who sent me letters on LinkedIn when we did the team from Arizona down at Rainier Beach. It's a very unique medium. And I was wondering your thoughts about how allowing high school athletes and high school sports has allowed us to develop an audience.
It's an audience that was waiting for someone to introduce themselves to it, really, and that's really what happened. We just said, okay, we're going to start broadcasting high school sports. Now, it wasn't that simple. We had to talk to the Metro League, which is the league that we predominantly do most of the games from. And they had to find value in it, which Eric McCurdy did, and Pat McCarthy did, and Tara Davis did. And they saw how we were doing what we were doing, and then when we showed up at the state tournament, the first day of the basketball, when all the teams have a chance to win, all the teams, everybody's a winner on day one. Everybody's excited. And we showed up with 10 kids to do the interviews, not us. 10 kids to interview their peers about what they thought about being in the state tournament. I think that really set the tone for who we are and what we're trying to be in this thing. And we brought, during the football championships one year, and I know Daniel remembers this, Ezel's brought enough chicken because we're thinking, okay, what are we going to do? Like we used to do in our thing where we get cake. And then they have a little room you can go to where you can get little snacks or whatever. I'm like, oh, we got a community that supports it. So we had Ezel's fried chicken, and they were like, oh, you're not supposed to bring all this food in here. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, why don't all of the broadcasters from all of the networks share this food? And everyone came over and brought Ezel's and got some of the Ezel's chicken because we had so much from every broadcaster that was there. And I think that showed who we were. We're just about community. I'm not saying that we have the most expensive equipment, that we have the most latest technological equipment. What I will say is that we're connected to community in any community. And that's what we strive to do, and we strive to do that well.
You had you touched on it earlier. You had the mayor's debate or the mayor's forum on Rainier Avenue Radio last Wednesday, and like I said, it was a packed house. My son was having surgery on his ankle, so I couldn't be there. But I was texting Tanya Wu, and she was there, and she was giving me a report. So it was a packed house. Um, and you and I have talked about politics so many times before. My wife doesn't like me to talk about politics, as you know, because it gets her into some really interesting conversations and sidebar things. The conversation around politics has been so contentious in our country, Tony, and it's one that is such an important conversation, but it is at times becoming less and less civil. The forum last week, how were you able, and what did you think about bringing some civility to this conversation? And even though we've got a couple of candidates who are lobbing barbs back and forth at each other, do you feel that do you feel that this role is for us to create a set of rules, or at least give a impression of trying to pull away from some of that, or as journalists, do we just allow it to happen?
Well, first we have to kick the door down to allow us to participate, because you don't just get to put on a candidate forum or a panel discussion.
Right.
There's actually an entity that was called the Washington State Debate Association that I'd never heard of. And I said, who empowered you to decide who will be on a debate and who can host it?
There was an actual Washington State debate.
Washington State Debate Association, that candidates would say, well, have you been approved by the Washington State Debate Association? Well, I don't have to be approved by the Washington State Debate Association. I don't know who they are. Anyway, so you have to kick the door down to be able to do these types of things to start with. And so, we did that. And then from there, it was just, what are the things that our community wants and needs to know about and doesn't know that they need to know about in order to get them to go register to vote and cast a vote. And that was kind of the impetus for what we were doing in regards to debates. I just remember so many different things. I remember when starting this radio station, someone said we'd never have more than 10 listeners. I remember when we were doing debates, somebody called it the Gong Show, because we had a DJ, because I was trying to get people to listen to the show. So, okay, well, let's have a DJ, you know what I mean? And we'll play a DJ in between breaks of this stuff. And so just doing things that were considered to be unconventional, but they weren't unconventional. They were conventional to our community. And I'm going to ask you one of the questions that I ask, and have different panelists and open it up. But I'm going to ask you one of the questions that I ask of our panelists. Is there a Black community in Seattle? And if so, if yes, where is it? I'm asking you.
I certainly, I would have answered this. I think that the economics in this city and the rise in expensive housing, the rise in expense of renting an apartment has pushed the Black community further and further into neighborhoods that are more affordable, whether that is Renton, Kent, Auburn. And so there isn't a distinguishable Black community as there was when I grew up here, and that obviously was a central area and certain elements of southeast and central, certain areas of southeast Seattle. But in my opinion, no, we don't have the Black community has been kind of dispersed. There are people living in more affordable locations in different places, and I think that's one of the reasons that makes this radio station so important.
Now, what I will say is go back and watch that candidate forum and watch those candidates struggle with that question, because they don't want to say what you just said, which is the way that it is.
Right.
And I want to, but every candidate on that panel struggled with answering that question, because they wanted to make sure that they answered it in a way that wasn't offensive to Black people, that wasn't offensive to white people, instead of just answering the question. And that's an example of, okay, Read between the lines. This is an opportunity for you as a Black community member to see which of these candidates is aware of your circumstances. Because you might live in Magnolia. You might live in South Seattle. You might live in Lake City. Does that make you a community? How will the elected official respond to your needs as a small business owner, respond to your needs when it comes to the current federal administration and the changes that are affecting you, understand how to reach you and connect with you if they don't know where you are? Because it's different. That's different. So, but watch each of the candidates.
You struggle
with that question.
As soon as I get home, I'm going to put that up on my big screen. I'm going to take a look at this.
And I wasn't trying to cause any. I asked that question because, again, I'm Black, and I needed to know which of these candidates are aware of my living circumstances, of my community or lack of community. How are you going to reach me? How are you going to say, this is one of my constituents who has needs that I also need to serve? If you're unaware of my community and where I live and how I work within the context of the city of Seattle.
There's a joke amongst all of us who are involved in politics. And like I said, I'm the difference between me and a politician is that a politician wins elections. I'm actually a statesman. So the question I ask you, Tony, is as we look at cycles and 4-year cycles, and 2028 obviously will be another 4-year cycle, and 2032 will be another 4-year cycle, and 36, and those different things. As you and I are also, our calendar numbers are starting to creep up a little teeny tiny bit. My question to you is this: the future of Rainier Avenue Radio and the impact that it has on the community. What's in a nutshell? What does the future look like for this?
That's why I engage young people, because it has to sustain. And Rainier Avenue Radio has to sustain beyond Tony B. It's got to sustain beyond Juan Cotto. It has to be able to shift and change with whatever the societal economic environment is and brings. And, I hope that can continue to happen.
Well, it will continue to happen. It also has to sustain with Daniel Bellis, who is telling me that we are at the end of this episode. Tony B, always a pleasure to chat with you, and always a pleasure to hear the foundation of what we do and then how it is delivered on Rainier Avenue Radio, and why this is your community radio station. And as he said, there's many opportunities, and if people who listen to this would like to have the opportunity to share their voice, the opportunity is here on your community radio station, Rainier Avenue Radio.world. Daniel, thank you so much for all you do for us.
Oh, really quickly.
Please.
You talked about baseball games. You listen to Juan Cotto do a baseball game, you'll swear this guy has been broadcasting radio for years. That is the perfect example of what I'm talking about. When opportunity presents itself, and opportunity was not presenting itself to you, and you ever broadcast baseball? No, I think you can. And you listen to Juan Cotto broadcast baseball, and you say, "Oh, of course he tells you wrong. Juan knows how to do this. Juan's been doing this for years." So that's just the example of why it's so important to get our voices on the radio, because we have to believe that we can do it, and then we have to be able to have the place to do it without the restrictions of saying you need to appeal to the dominant race. Whatever your vernacular is, whatever your elocution is what it is, but when you are narrowed down into thinking you have to sound like this, you have to perform like this in order to be acceptable, those are part of the barriers that make it difficult for us to be part of something. And only a very special few who have performed at a high level on professional sports get that opportunity and are allowed to say, this is who I am and this is how I speak. And not changing, but you see more of it on major sports programming, but you're not seeing it from people who aren't at the highest level of their sport.
Right.
My thing is anybody can do that. And I think that that's scary to people who want to think, well, this is an exceptional field where you have to have this and that in order to be part of the game. But all of that, getting back to listen to Juan on baseball, also listen to him on football.
On your community radio station, Rainier Avenue Radio.world. We'll see you next episode.